What if you woke up tomorrow in medieval London, but it wasn't the bustling trade centre from your history books? What if instead you found yourself in September 1348, when the Black Death had just begun its merciless harvest of souls? Tonight, you are the night watchman, one of the few still brave enough or desperate enough to walk the plagued streets after curfew. Armed with only a lantern, a staff, and a horn to sound the alarm, you'll patrol from dusk until dawn through a city transforming into something unrecognizable. You'll witness red crosses appearing on familiar doors, step carefully around bodies awaiting the death carts, and make impossible choices between duty and compassion. You'll breathe in the smoke of supposed plague remedies, hear the endless tolling of church bells counting the dead, and encounter those who've abandoned all hope alongside those who cling to it desperately. This is London at its darkest hour, where a third of the population will perish, where the wealthy die as readily as the poor, and where survival depends as much on luck as on the vinegar-soaked cloth covering your face. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the curfew bell transport you back nearly 700 years to walk the moonlit cobblestones of a city under siege by an invisible enemy. Your watch begins now. You wake gradually in your small chamber above the ward office, the familiar ache in your bones reminding you of another night's duty ahead. The curfew bell of St. Mary le Bow begins its solemn toll, each strike reverberating through the timber frame of your modest quarters. 8 times it rings, marking the hour when all honest citizens must retreat behind barred doors, leaving the streets to the watch, the desperate, and the dead. Your straw pallet crackles as you rise, the September chill of 1348 seeping through the thin walls. The room smells of tallow and dried herbs. Bundles of rue and wormwood hang from the rafters, their bitter scent supposedly warred against the pestilence that arrived in London just 3 weeks past. Your fingers find the rough wool of your watchman's coat in the darkness, its weight familiar yet heavier each night as the burden of your duties grows with the mounting dead. The leather pouch at your belt contains the necessities of your trade, a stub of chalk for marking infected houses, dried vinegar-soaked cloth to cover your nose and mouth when the stench becomes unbearable, and a small vial of theriac, that ancient remedy of crushed vipers and honey that the apothecaries swear protects against the plague's evil humors. You know better than to trust it completely, but in these times even false hope serves a purpose. Your equipment waits by the door, the iron-headed staff that marks your authority, its length suited to keeping the infected at a distance while still commanding respect. The lantern, its horn panels yellowed with age, needs fresh tallow before the night's patrol. The horn hanging from a leather cord bears the city's arms, its brass surface worn smooth from your predecessor, who died just last week, blood frothing from his mouth as the plague boil swelled in his neck. Through your small window, you observe the city below, transformed from the bustling trade center you once knew into something unrecognizable. The usual evening sounds of families settling for the night have been replaced by an oppressive quiet, broken only by occasional weeping and the distant rumble of death carts already beginning their grim harvest. You descend the narrow wooden stairs, each step announcing your movement with a hollow creak that echoes in the empty ward office below. The main room, which once buzzed with the administrative business of the district, now serves as a makeshift recording station for the plague dead. Parchments stack high on the oak table, each one listing names, addresses, and dates, a growing testament to the pestilence's hunger. The inkpot sits uncovered, its surface skinned over from lack of use since the day clerk fled the city with his family 5 days ago. Your lantern requires attention before venturing out. You lift it carefully, feeling the weight of the iron frame and the leather straps that allow you to carry it while keeping your hands free for your staff. The horn panels, Thin sheets scraped from cattle horns until nearly transparent protect the flame from London's persistent winds while still allowing light to escape. You work the tallow into place, a fresh candle that should last through your 8-hour watch. The smell of rendered fat mingles with the ever-present scent of death that has settled over the city like morning fog. Stepping through the heavy door onto Aldgate Street, the transformation of your familiar district strikes you anew. The merchant stalls that should be locked and shuttered for the night stand open and abandoned, their canvas covers flapping like burial shrouds in the evening breeze. Bolts of wool lie exposed to the elements, their rich colors, once worth a craftsman's monthly wage, now worthless as their owners either fled or perished. A child's wooden toy horse lies forgotten in a puddle, its painted smile a mockery of happier times, merely a month past. The weight of your equipment settles into a familiar rhythm as you begin your rounds. The staff's iron head taps against the cobblestones with each step, a metallic heartbeat that announces your presence to anyone listening from behind barred doors and shuttered windows. Your lantern swings gently, casting dancing shadows that make the empty street seem populated by ghosts of the commerce that once thrived here. The horn at your hip bounces with your movement, ready to sound the alarm for fire, riot, or any of the dozen other catastrophes that threaten a city where normal order has begun to collapse under the weight of incomprehensible death. You begin your formal rounds by turning toward Houndsditch, where the first cluster of marked houses awaits your inspection. The red crosses painted on these doors have become as common as shop signs, each one accompanied by the plea, "Lord have mercy upon us," scrawled in uneven letters. The paint appears fresh on several doors, still glistening wet in your lantern light, marking families newly sealed inside for the mandatory 40 days of quarantine. From behind these barriers come the sounds that haunt every watchman's dreams. The low moaning of the sick, the desperate prayers of the healthy, and worst of all, the sudden silence that speaks of another soul departed. Your duty requires checking each sealed house, ensuring the markings remain intact and that none have attempted to break the quarantine. At the third house, you notice scratch marks around the edges of the door, fingernails having gouged the soft pine in someone's desperate attempt to escape their prison. The wood bears rusty brown stains, where bloody fingers worked at the barrier until exhaustion or death ended their efforts. You make a note in your mind to report this to the parish constable, though you know little will come of it. The living barely have resources to manage the living, let alone investigate the circumstances of the trapped dead. A muffled weeping draws your attention to a house bearing a cross so faded it must have been painted in the plague's first days. You approach carefully, standing at the distance your staff allows, and call out the traditional watchman's query. A woman's voice, hoarse from crying or sickness, responds that her husband and 2 children have passed, their bodies still inside with her, as she hasn't the strength to move them to the door for collection. She begs for water, for food, for someone to at least take the bodies so she doesn't have to see their faces turning black with settled blood. You set down your lantern and retrieve the chalk from your pouch, adding a notation beside the door that bodies await collection. It's all you can do. The death cart men will come when they come, and entering a plague house means certain quarantine or death for you as well. The woman's sobbing follows you as you continue down the street, each sealed door a tomb for the living and the dead alike, red crosses multiplying like a pox upon the face of London itself. You encounter your first corpse of the night, slumped in the narrow alley between a cobbler's shop and a bakery, the body positioned as if the person simply sat down to rest and never rose again. The flickering light of your lantern reveals a man of middle years, his guild badge marking him as a member of the worshipful company of fishmongers. His face bears the telltale signs, blackened fingers where he clutched his throat, dried blood crusted around his nose and mouth, and the infamous buboes swollen to the size of hen's eggs in his neck, their surfaces split and weeping, a foul-smelling pus that has soaked into his wool tunic. You maintain your distance while pulling the vinegar-soaked cloth from your pouch, tying it across your nose and mouth. The sharp acidic smell barely masks the sweet sick stench of death that grows stronger each night as bodies accumulate faster than they can be collected. Protocol demands you mark the location for the death carts that will pass through before dawn. Using your chalk, you draw the prescribed symbol on the nearest wall, a simple cross with the date and your watchman's mark, ensuring the collectors know this body has been recorded and isn't some murder victim requiring investigation. The man's purse remains at his belt, untouched despite the valuable silver coins visible through its loosened drawstring. Even London's thieves have learned to fear the plague's touch more than they desire wealth. You note how his hands clutch a small wooden cross, its edges worn smooth from desperate prayer. A letter peeks from his coat pocket, the wax seal unbroken. Perhaps final words to family who will never receive them, or business dealings that no longer matter in this new world where death renders all contracts void. You step back into the main street, leaving the fishmonger to await his final journey. Your ledger will record him simply as one body, fishmonger, found corner of Bread Street, plague signs evident. By morning, he'll be one of dozens loaded onto the carts, tumbled together regardless of station or wealth, united in death as they never were in life. The dignity of individual burial has become another casualty of the pestilence. The Great Plague pits outside the city walls make no distinction between beggar and merchant, all feeding the same lime-covered ground that struggles to contain London's dead. You continue your patrol into Cheapside Market, once the beating heart of London's commerce, now a grotting monument to abandoned prosperity. Your lantern light catches the metallic sheen of spoiled fish scales scattered across the cobblestones, their bodies long since consumed by the armies of rats that have inherited the market. The rodents move without fear, some as large as young cats, their sleek bodies gorged on the feast of abandonment. They barely scatter at your approach, their red eyes reflecting your light as they pause in their gnawing of rotted turnips and putrid meat that no one dares purchase or sell. The covered stalls tell stories of hasty flight. A merchant's counting table remains set with silver pennies scattered across its surface, the transaction forever incomplete. Bolts of Flemish cloth, worth small fortunes just weeks ago, now serve as nesting material for vermin. The spice merchant's stall releases clouds of peppercorn and cinnamon as rats burrow through the sacks, their contents mixing with excrement and decay into an unholy perfume that makes your eyes water even through your vinegar cloth. Your staff proves useful here, sweeping aside the bolder rats that dart toward your boots, perhaps mistaking you for another corpse to investigate. The ironmonger's stall displays its wares to empty air, cooking pots, knife blades, and farming tools that rust in the September damp. You notice how some items have been arranged into a crude message: God's punishment is upon us. Whether left by the fleeing merchant or arranged by some fevered soul seeking meaning in chaos, the words capture the city's growing despair. A crash from deeper in the market makes you freeze, hand instinctively moving to your horn. Your lantern swings as you investigate, revealing only a skeletal cat that has knocked over a pottery display while hunting. The poor creature, ribs visible through patchy fur, carries a dead rat nearly its own size. Even the predators struggle in this new ecosystem of death and abandonment. You watch it disappear into the shadows, understanding its desperate hunger. The city's cats and dogs, once fed by kindly shopkeepers and household scraps, now fend for themselves as their masters sicken or flee. The great market cross stands at Cheapside's centre, its stone base covered in desperate messages chalked by citizens, prayers for mercy, names of the missing, offers to buy or sell remedies at impossible prices, and simple farewells from those who knew their time had come. You're drawn from reading these desperate scrawls by the sound of metal against stone, the distinctive scrape of grave robbers at work. Following the noise towards St. Paul's churchyard, you quicken your pace while maintaining caution. The cathedral's massive silhouette blocks the stars, its spire a black finger pointing toward a heaven that seems to have abandoned London. Your lantern light catches movement among the headstones, 3 figures hunched over a fresh mound of earth, their spades working efficiently to reach whatever valuables were buried with the deceased. You announce yourself with the traditional watchman's call, your voice carrying authority despite the cloth covering your mouth. The grave robbers freeze, their faces pale in your light, dirt caking their hands and clothes. 2 are young men, perhaps apprentices whose masters have died or fled, leaving them without legitimate means of survival. The 3rd is an older woman, her once respectable dress now mud-stained and torn. They don't run immediately, calculating whether you'll pursue them through a churchyard full of plague dead. Your staff strikes the ground hard, the iron head ringing against a flat grave marker. You remind them that disturbing Christian burial is both crime and sin, that the bishop has pronounced excommunication upon any who violate the plague dead. The younger men exchange glances, their spades dropping from nerveless fingers. The woman, however, stands straighter, desperation overtaking fear. She speaks of 3 children at home, her husband dead 5 days past, no food, no coal for warmth, no hope but what the dead might provide. Her voice carries the hollow tone of someone who has already accepted damnation as the price of survival. You stand your ground, duty warring with compassion. The law is clear, yet the city's normal order has collapsed so thoroughly that enforcing old rules seems almost absurd. You make your decision, pointing your staff toward the churchyard gate. Leave now, you command, and don't return while you're on watch. Take nothing from this grave, but you name a house on Silver Street where a merchant died yesterday. His family fled to the countryside. What they might find there, searching among abandoned property rather than consecrated ground, is their own business. The trio retreats quickly before you might reconsider, the woman muttering what might be thanks or curses. You approach the disturbed grave, using your boot to push the excavated earth back into place. Your report will mention checking the churchyard, finding nothing of note. Some sins, you've learned, are born of necessity rather than evil. You help an elderly woman who has collapsed against the stone wall of St. Lawrence Jewry, her thin frame barely visible in the bundle of ragged shawls she's wrapped herself in. Your first instinct warns you to maintain distance, but her voice, weak and cracked from thirst, carries no wet rattle of plagued lung. She speaks of hunger, not sickness. Her husband, a goldsmith, dead 2 weeks past from the pestilence, leaving her without guild protection or family support. The parish relief, she explains, has been overwhelmed since the 2nd week, turning away all but those actually dying. You kneel at a careful distance, setting your lantern on the ground between you to create a small circle of warm light. From your belt pouch, you retrieve the small loaf of coarse bread meant to sustain you through your watch. The decision comes without thought. You've seen too much death to let preventable suffering pass unmarked. You place the bread on a flat stone and push it toward her with your staff, maintaining the crucial distance that might mean the difference between charity and contamination. Her gnarled fingers clutch the bread like a religious relic, tears tracking clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks. Between small, careful bites, the practiced eating of someone who knows this meal must last, she tells you of the London before. She remembers the last great mortality of 1315, when rain ruined harvests and people starved. But even that horror pales against this invisible enemy that strikes down the healthy and wealthy as readily as the poor and sick. Her goldsmith husband had crafted a reliquary for St. Paul's, she says, yet no amount of piety protected him from the blood that eventually poured from his mouth. You help her rise, noting a recessed doorway nearby where she might shelter through the night, protected from both wind and the more predatory survivors who hunt the weak after darkness falls. Your duty doesn't include such kindness, yet maintaining some semblance of human compassion feels like resistance against the savage arithmetic of plague time, where life's value is measured only in contamination risk. As you continue your rounds, you mark mentally the location of an abandoned grocer's shop 2 streets over, where she might find turnips and dried peas overlooked by looters seeking more valuable goods. You investigate strange smoke rising from an apothecary's shop on Bucklersbury Street, its green-tinged plumes visible against the starlight. The painted sign of mortar and pestle still hangs above the door, though half its chain has broken, leaving it to swing at an uncomfortable angle. Through the warped glass windows, flames dance with an unusual brightness, casting purple and yellow shadows that suggest someone burns more than simple wood. You rap your staff against the doorframe, announcing yourself as the watch, demanding to know who breaks curfew within. The door opens to reveal a thin man in the leather apron of his trade, his face gaunt from exhaustion rather than illness. Master Thomas Haddon. He identifies himself, licensed apothecary of the Worshipful Society, working through the night by special dispensation from the Lord Mayor himself. He holds up a parchment bearing an official seal, though you note his hands tremble, whether from fatigue or fear of your authority remains unclear. Behind him, the shop resembles an alchemist's fever dream, every surface covered with bubbling vessels, grinding stones, and bundles of herbs both familiar and exotic. The source of the strange smoke becomes clear as he explains his work, burning specific combinations of herbs that supposedly cleanse the air of plague miasma. Wormwood, juniper, dried rose petals, and substances he names in Latin that you don't recognize, feed carefully tended braziers. The smoke should drift through the streets, he insists, purifying the corrupt atmosphere that spreads disease. You've heard similar theories from university-educated physicians, though the pile of bodies growing daily suggests their understanding remains imperfect at best. He offers you a small leather pouch of the burning mixture, suggesting you might place it in your lantern to protect yourself during rounds. The gesture seems genuine, born from one professional acknowledging another's dangerous duty. You accept it carefully, noting how he maintains his own distance despite the offered kindness. He speaks rapidly about his theories, how the plague travels through corrupted air, how certain herbs from the east might counteract its poison, how the alignment of planets has created conditions allowing such pestilence to flourish. You leave him to his work, adding a handful of his mixture to your lantern, where it creates aromatic smoke that at least improves upon the city's current perfume of death and decay. Whether it provides actual protection remains God's secret, but the sharp herbal scent helps mask the worst of what you encounter. You walk along the Thames riverside, where London's great commercial artery has slowed to barely a trickle of its former flow. The usual forest of masts has thinned to perhaps a dozen ships, most showing no signs of life aboard. Your lantern light reflects off the black water, its surface undisturbed by the normal nighttime activities of loading and unloading that once continued round the clock. The wherries that ferried passengers across the river lie beached like dying fish, their operators fled or dead, wood already beginning to crack from neglect. The great merchant vessels that remain show signs of hasty abandonment, cargo nets still full, suspended halfway between deck and dock, their contents rotting in the September air. One ship lists noticeably, taking on water through seams no longer maintained by absent crew. You recognize the banner of a Venetian trader, its rich fabric now torn and stained. The Italians were among the first to flee when news arrived that this same pestilence had already consumed their homeland, leaving behind fortunes in goods rather than risk another day in London's poisoned air. Your patrol takes you past the dock workers' taverns, all sealed and silent, where once rough songs and rougher laughter would have spilled into the night. Through one broken window, you glimpse overturned tables and scattered pewter tankards, evidence of the last night before the plague transformed celebration into survival. A cat slinks from the shadows, carrying something in its mouth you choose not to examine closely. The dock cats, once fat on fishmonger scraps, now hunt darker prey among the wharves. The river itself has changed, running cleaner than you've ever seen it, without the constant dumping of tannery waste, butcher's offal, and human refuse. Nature reclaims what commerce has abandoned. You notice herons fishing where boats once moored, their elegant forms strange against the backdrop of empty warehouses. The mudlarks who once scavenged the Thames shoreline at low tide have vanished, either dead or fled, leaving their bent pins and coal fragments to sink into the mud unmarked. At Billingsgate Dock, where fish merchants once haggled before dawn, you find only the skeleton of commerce, empty barrels, abandoned scales, and ledgers left open to rain damage. The last entry you can make out dates from 3 weeks past. God preserve us, the sickness has come. Below it in different ink someone has added, he did not. You discover a hidden gathering of flagellants in the courtyard behind St. Dunstan's Church, their moans and the sharp crack of whips cutting through the night's relative quiet. Perhaps 20 souls circle the yard in slow procession, stripped to the waist despite the September chill, their backs already striped with fresh wounds layered over older scars. They strike themselves in rhythm, metal-tipped leather scourges bringing fresh blood with each blow, while they chant prayers in broken Latin mixed with English pleas for God's mercy upon London. You observe from the shadowed archway, your duty requiring you to document such gatherings despite understanding the desperation that drives them. The flagellants believe their suffering might appease God's wrath, that voluntary penance could lift the pestilence he has sent as punishment for mankind's sins. Their leader, a gaunt man whose back resembles raw meat more than human flesh, calls out specific sins between strikes: usury, adultery, pride, gluttony, as if naming evil might somehow banish it from the city's corrupted soul. Among them you recognize faces from better times. A wool merchant who once strutted Cheapside in fur-trimmed robes, a young priest from St. Michael's, even a woman you recall selling ribbons at market. Their social stations have dissolved in shared agony, united in the belief that their blood might purchase salvation for themselves or their city. One younger man collapses, his strength finally failing, and 2 others help him to the side, where he continues weakly striking his shoulders, unwilling to abandon the ritual despite his body's protests. The church has forbidden such displays, declaring them heretical, yet desperation breeds its own theology. You pull out your chalk to mark the location on the nearest wall, not for immediate arrest, as the city's authority has greater concerns, but for the records that someone, somewhere, still maintains. The flagellants will disperse before dawn anyway, melting back into the dying city to tend their wounds and gather strength for tomorrow night's penance. You've seen 3 such groups this week alone, each believing their particular formula of suffering might prove the key to divine intervention. As you turn to leave, the leader's eyes meet yours across the courtyard. He doesn't cease his self-punishment, but nods slightly, acknowledging your presence and your choice not to intervene. His lips move in what might be blessing or curse as blood runs down his ribs, black in the moonlight. You pass through the shambles, the butcher's quarter, where the assault on your senses reaches new depths of wretchedness. The drainage channels carved into the street's center, designed to carry away blood and offal, have backed up with no one to maintain them. A thick sludge of rotted blood, putrefying organs and rainwater creates a black river down the middle of the lane that your boots squelch through despite your attempts to walk along the edges. Your vinegar cloth does little against the overwhelming stench that seems to coat the inside of your throat with each breath. The butcher stalls stand empty, but far from clean. Meat hooks still hold remnants of carcasses that have putrefied beyond recognition, covered in a writing mass of maggots that drop to the ground with soft, wet sounds. The blocks where skilled hands once carved joints now serve as breeding grounds for flies so numerous they create a humming darkness in your lantern light. You notice how even the rats avoid certain areas where the corruption has grown too foul for even their hardy constitutions. A sudden movement catches your eye. A dog, once someone's pet by the leather collar still around its neck, tears at something behind a stall. The animal has gone feral, ribs showing through patchy fur, growling low as you pass. It's feeding on what might have been a sheep carcass, or perhaps something you don't want to identify more closely. The plague has transformed London's dogs from companions to competitors, another danger in streets already full of threats. The worshipful company of Butcher's Hall stands at the quarter's end, its ornate doorway now marking only abandonment. Someone has nailed a crude sign to the door. "Seek not flesh here, all is corruption." Whether warning or biblical pronouncement, the words carry truth. You've heard that some desperate souls have resorted to eating the abandoned meat, cooking it over fires they hope might purify the corruption. The results, predictably, add dysentery to the plague's death toll. Your boots will need burning after this patrol, the leather now soaked with substances that no amount of cleaning could properly purify. Each step makes a horrible sucking sound as you finally exit the shambles, leaving behind the worst of London's putrefaction. You scrape your boots against cleaner cobblestones, though you know the stench will follow you through the remainder of your watch, a reminder that civilization's veneer wears thin when death overwhelms the living's ability to maintain even basic sanitation. You encounter another watchman at the ward boundary near Aldersgate, old William Thorne, who's worked these streets for 15 years. His lantern light mingles with yours as you exchange the traditional greeting, though neither of you removes the protective cloth from your faces. William looks haggard, his usual sturdy frame diminished by exhaustion and the terrible knowledge that comes from witnessing your city die street by street. He leans heavily on his staff, and you notice dark stains on his coat that suggest his night has been no easier than yours. He shares the grim tallies from his ward: 18 dead since yesterday's sunset, 7 new houses marked for quarantine, and an entire family found deceased in their beds with no signs of struggle, as if the plague took them peacefully in their sleep. The Carpenters' Guildhall has become a makeshift dead house, he reports, filled beyond capacity with bodies awaiting burial. The death carts can't keep pace anymore, and there's talk of digging new plague pits outside Bishopsgate, though who will do the digging remains unclear, as even the gravediggers succumb to what they bury. William mentions seeing strange lights in the sky 2 nights past. Green flames dancing above the church spires that some claim were souls ascending to heaven, while others insist they marked the devil collecting his due. You've heard similar reports from other watchmen, though whether they represent divine portent or simply exhausted minds creating meaning from nothing remains uncertain. In times like these, the line between miracle and madness grows perilously thin. He passes you a small leather flask from his coat, offering the traditional Watchman's comfort of cheap ale mixed with herbs. You accept it gratefully, taking a small sip through your cloth mask, tasting wormwood and something bitter that might be ground willow bark. The warmth spreads through your chest, temporarily pushing back the night's chill and horror. You share what you've seen. The flagellants, the abandoned ships, the elderly woman you helped, and he nods, understanding at each detail, filing it away in the mental map every watchman maintains. Before parting, William grips your shoulder briefly, a moment of human contact that violates every precaution but affirms something essential about maintaining connection in catastrophe. God preserve you through the night, he says, the traditional parting carrying weight it never held before. You return the blessing, watching his lantern light disappear down Aldersgate Street, knowing that each night's farewell might be the last between old colleagues. You investigate screaming from the Boar's Head Tavern on Eastcheap, though the establishment should have been shuttered hours ago by curfew law. The door hangs partially open, warm light spilling onto the street along with the sounds of panic and breaking pottery. You push through with your staff leading, finding a scene of chaos within. Perhaps a dozen people crowd the common room, all backing away from a man who has just collapsed near the hearth, his body convulsing as blood begins to froth from his mouth, the final stage of plague that sometimes comes with terrifying swiftness. The illegal late-night drinkers scramble over each other to escape, abandoning tankards and coins in their desperation to distance themselves from contamination. A serving woman presses herself against the far wall, her face white with terror as she realizes she's been serving this man for hours, handling his coins, refilling his cup. The tavern keeper, a stout man you recognize as Martin Brewster, stands frozen behind his bar, calculating whether his profitable illegal opening has just signed his death warrant. You use your staff to block the doorway, preventing the panicked exodus that would scatter potentially infected people throughout the night streets. Your voice carries hard authority as you order everyone to remain where they are, explaining that they must all now be marked for quarantine observation. The pronouncement brings fresh cries of despair, one young man actually attempting to rush past you before your staff across his chest sends him stumbling backward. The dying man's convulsions cease, his body going still in that particular way that needs no confirmation. Blood pools beneath his head, black in the firelight, while the foam around his mouth carries the pink tinge that marks plagued lung. You order everyone to move to the far side of the room, then use your chalk to mark a line across the floor that none may cross. The tavern itself must be sealed, you explain, and all present must provide their names and addresses for the quarantine rolls. Martin Brewster begins to bargain, offering silver, then gold, for you to forget what you've seen. Others join in, pooling their resources in desperate bidding for their freedom. You feel the weight of the purse at your belt, knowing what even a few of those coins could buy in these times. But you also know that each person here could be carrying death to families, spreading the pestilence through their fear-driven flight. You patrol near the Tower of London, where the great fortress looms against the stars like England's gravestone. The moat surrounding it releases a different stench than usual, not just the normal sewage and stagnation, but the sweet, sick smell of decomposition from bodies that have been dumped there when even the death carts couldn't keep pace. Your lantern light catches the flutter of black wings as ravens feast on remains that float in the befouled water, their harsh cries echoing off the tower walls. The birds have multiplied beyond counting, drawn by the abundance of carrion that now defines London. They perch on every available surface, walls, posts, shop signs, their intelligent eyes tracking your movement with unsettling awareness. Some have grown so bold they barely move aside as you pass, merely hopping back a few feet while maintaining their claim on whatever flesh they've found. their beaks drip with gore that appears black in the darkness, and several drag intestines behind them like grotesque ribbons. You notice bodies that weren't collected quickly enough, lying in the shadow of the tower walls, partially consumed by the ravens and whatever else feeds in darkness. The death cart men have begun to refuse certain areas, declaring them too dangerous or too corrupted to enter. These forgotten dead become part of the landscape, their faces picked clean until white bone gleams through tears in putrefying flesh. One body wears the remains of a fine wool coat, suggesting wealth that couldn't purchase survival or even dignified disposal. A raven larger than the rest watches you from atop a corpse, its beak buried in the soft tissue of an eye socket. It caws once, a sound that seems almost mocking, before returning to its grisly meal. You've heard stories that the tower ravens possess unusual intelligence, that they can recognize individual people and remember faces. This one's stare feels personal, as if it knows you for what you are, another future meal, walking only temporarily upright. The tower guards themselves rarely venture out anymore, you notice. The fortress has sealed itself against the plague, though you wonder if stone walls can truly bar an enemy that travels on breath and touch. Arrow slits show flickers of torchlight within, evidence that some still maintain their posts. You wonder if they watch the city die from their battlements, bearing witness to London's consumption by disease, rather than foreign army. The tower has stood through conquest and rebellion, but this enemy requires no siege engines, no armies, only time and proximity to achieve victory. You check on the orphan child you've been monitoring for 3 nights now, finding the small form huddled in the doorway of a collapsed chandler's shop off Thames Street. The boy, you guess perhaps 7 or 8 years, has wrapped himself in a torn piece of sailcloth, his thin body barely visible within its folds. His eyes open as your lantern light falls across him, still alert despite the hollow cheeks that speak of prolonged hunger. No plague signs yet, though in a child so weakened, the pestilence would likely bring swift death. You maintain your careful distance while pulling the remaining food from your pouch, a piece of hard cheese and an apple you'd been saving for later in your watch. The child watches with desperate intensity as you place the food on a broken barrel and push it toward him with your staff. His small hands snatch the offerings quickly, as if they might disappear, and he eats with the focused determination of someone who has learned that meals are no longer guaranteed. Through broken speech between bites, he tells you his name is Thomas, that his mother was a seamstress who died coughing blood, his father a tanner who never came home from work one day. He's been living in the streets for many days, children's vague sense of time made vaguer by trauma. He knows to avoid the sick, to stay away from rats, to hide when the death carts pass. This terrible education has kept him alive, while stronger souls have perished. You tell him about St. Bartholomew's Priory, where the monks still take in orphans despite the danger, feeding them and teaching them letters. The boy shakes his head vigorously. He's seen other children go there and never return, though whether from death or adoption remains unclear. His fear of institutions seems less dangerous than continued street living, yet you recognize the fierce independence that survival has taught him. Before leaving, you point out a baker's shop, 2 streets over where the owner died, but left stores of grain in the cellar, information that might sustain him another few days. You mark the wall near his doorway with your Watchman sign, and a special notation that means, "Do not disturb," a small protection that might keep other patrols or the death cart men from investigating his hiding place too closely. The boy clutches the apple core like a talisman, his eyes following your lantern as you continue your rounds. You witness a death cart collection at the intersection of Gracechurch and Lombard Streets, where the ritual of mass disposal has become grimly efficient. The cart itself, reinforced with additional boards to hold more bodies, creaks under its terrible load. Two men in waxed leather coats work mechanically, their faces covered by cloths soaked in vinegar and strong spirits. They call out the traditional warning, "Bring out your dead," though their voices carry exhaustion rather than the formal gravity such work once commanded. Doors open cautiously along the street, and figures emerge carrying their burdens. A woman drags her husband's body by the arms, lacking the strength to lift him properly, his head bumping against cobblestones with hollow sounds. An elderly man carries what might be a child wrapped in bedsheets, the small size making the bundle seem almost weightless. Each family must also present the death certificate from the parish, though you notice the collectors barely glance at the papers before tossing them into a separate sack. The loading process follows its own horrible choreography. Bodies are stacked like cordwood, arranged to maximize space with no regard for dignity or identity. Arms and legs are tucked and folded, heads positioned to fill gaps, the human form reduced to geometric problems of efficiency. One collector uses a long hook to arrange the corpses, avoiding direct touch, even through his gloves. You count at least 20 bodies already loaded, with more households yet to respond. A disturbance erupts when a woman refuses to release her daughter's body, clinging to the wrapped form, and wailing that the girl might only be sleeping deeply, that plague sometimes mimics death. The collectors have seen this before, denial making the impossible seem reasonable. They wait with practiced patience, while neighbors gently pry the mother's fingers loose, supporting her as she collapses in grief. The small body joins the pile, disappearing among strangers who share only the commonality of death's timing. The cart moves on, wheels leaving dark stains on the cobblestones from the fluids that leak between the boards. Its next stop will be similar, and the one after, until the cart can hold no more and must make its journey to the plague pits beyond the walls. You follow at a distance for a while, noting how even stray dogs avoid the death cart's path, some primitive wisdom warning them away from such concentrated contamination. You navigate through Pudding Lane, where the bakers' ovens still glow despite the late hour, their work continuing through plague time as one of the few trades deemed essential enough to break curfew. The smell of baking bread creates a surreal contrast to the decay that permeates most of London, though you notice the loaves displayed in windows look smaller than before, the flour stretched with sawdust and ground peas as grain supplies dwindle. Several bakers work with cloths tied across their faces, trying to protect against both plague and flour dust. Through one shop window, you observe a baker pulling loaves from his oven, with the mechanical movements of someone beyond exhaustion. His apprentice, a boy perhaps 12 years old, arranges the cooling bread on racks. Both show the 1,000-yard stare of those who continue working not from hope, but from habit, the routine of their trade providing structure in a world gone formless with death. The baker notices your watchman's lantern and nods acknowledgement, one essential worker recognizing another. You hear raised voices from a shop further down, and investigate, finding two bakers arguing over grain supplies. One accuses the other of hoarding, of charging murderous prices for bread that should be affordable to the dying poor. The accused responds that money means nothing if there's no grain to buy, that the mills outside London have stopped delivering as their workers die or flee. Their argument captures the larger breakdown, traditional commerce collapsing as currency loses meaning against survival's immediate demands. A small crowd has gathered despite curfew, drawn by the smell of fresh bread and the desperate hope of purchasing food. You see hollow faces, trembling hands, clutching coins that might have bought feast supplies weeks ago, but now barely purchase a single loaf. The bakers try to maintain order, limiting each person to one small loaf, though you observe how they slip extra rolls to families with visible children. Small mercies persist even as larger systems fail. The warmth from the ovens draws people like moths, and you must disperse several groups who attempt to sleep near the shop fronts. The risk of fire adds to plague danger, exhausted bakers working with open flames while desperate people crowd too close. You make mental note to ensure the night fire watch pays special attention to Pudding Lane. London can survive plague, perhaps, but plague and fire together would leave nothing but ash and memory. You break up a violent dispute in front of a deceased merchant's shop on Wood Street, where two families have simultaneously attempted to claim the abandoned property. The Harpers argue their daughter was betrothed to the merchant's son, making them inheritors by marriage contract. The Chandlers claim an outstanding debt that grants them rights to seized property. Both groups waive documents that might be legitimate or hastily forged in these times. Who remains to verify such claims when clerks and lawyers die as readily as anyone else? The confrontation has escalated beyond words. A young man from the Harper family bleeds from a split lip, while a Chandler woman nurses a blackened eye. They've broken the shop shutters and scattered its contents into the street, bolts of cloth, pewter vessels, accounting ledgers now rain-damaged and useless. Each family grabs what they can, while shouting accusations of theft, and worse. You notice how their anger focuses on each other, rather than the true enemy that has created these circumstances. Your staff strikes the cobblestones repeatedly before they acknowledge your authority, too consumed by their dispute to notice the watcher's arrival. You demand they cease immediately, that all goods be left where they fall, until proper authorities can adjudicate ownership. Both families turn their anger toward you now, united momentarily in outrage that you would deny them what they've risked infection to claim. Someone suggests the watch has been taking bribes to look the other way, that you plan to return later for the goods yourself. The accusation stings because you've heard of Watchman doing exactly that. The complete breakdown of oversight, creating opportunities for those willing to exploit catastrophe. You maintain your stern demeanor, reminding them that violence during curfew carries severe penalties, that the Lord Mayor has authorized Watchmen to use all necessary force. The threat works partially. Both families begin backing away, though not without stuffing their pockets with smaller valuables. As they disperse, you notice an old woman watching from an upper window across the street. She calls down that both families lie. The merchant's son lives, fled to Oxford when the plague began, and would be appalled to see his inheritance fought over like carrion. Her testimony means nothing legally, but it reminds you how quickly the living move to claim from the presumed dead. How plague transforms neighbors into scavengers competing for whatever remains. You pause at St. Bartholomew's Church, where desperate souls have gathered despite the ban on religious assemblies. They kneel in the churchyard, leaving offerings at the shrine of St. Bartholomew, bread they can't spare, coins that might buy medicine, personal treasures that hold meaning only to their owners. Some have written prayers on scraps of parchment, weighted down with stones against the night wind. Others leave locks of hair, wedding rings, children's toys, tokens of lives. The plague threatens to erase entirely. The church doors remain locked by order of the bishop, who declared that gathering for services would only spread God's punishment faster through his flock. Yet people find ways to maintain faith when official channels close. They pray alone or in pairs, maintaining careful distance from each other while seeking comfort in proximity to sacred ground. An elderly priest, defying his own church's orders, moves among them offering blessings from 6 feet away, his voice carrying Latin phrases that most don't understand, but find soothing nonetheless. You notice fresh graves in the churchyard, far more than the space should hold. The ground has been consecrated and reconsecrated to accommodate the overflow. Graves dug between existing stones, bodies buried atop bodies in layers that will confuse future archaeologists. Some graves bear no markers, save small wooden crosses, names already fading in London's perpetual damp. Others show signs of recent visitation. Withered flowers, candle stubs, messages to the dead written in charcoal on nearby walls. A young woman approaches the shrine carrying an infant who burns with fever. Though not necessarily plague fever, children sicken from many causes, all potentially fatal in these times. She lays the baby at the shrine's base, praying with the fervent intensity of a mother who has exhausted earthly remedies. You want to warn her about the danger of public spaces, the risk of exposure, but her desperation transcends rational precaution. Faith and hope become indistinguishable when both represent last resorts. You continue past without intervention, noting only that religious activity continues despite prohibition. Your role involves maintaining order, not crushing the spiritual comfort that helps some endure unendurable loss. The priest nods as you pass, acknowledging your choice to overlook his violation of church decree. In times when God seems absent, those who claim to speak for him must sometimes break his earthly representative's rules. You discover a plague doctor in the courtyard behind St. Mary's Spital, his distinctive costume marking him as one of the physicians who claim special knowledge of the pestilence. The leather coat reaches to his ankles, waxed to repel infectious vapors. His mask, that notorious bird-beak shape, projects from his face like some medieval monster, glass eyepieces reflecting your lantern light. The beak, you know, contains aromatic herbs, myrrh, camphor, rose petals, that supposedly filter the corrupted air that carries disease. He tends to 3 patients laid out on wooden boards, each showing different stages of plague infection. One man exhibits the early symptoms: fever, chills, the beginning swellings in neck and groin. A woman shows the black fingers that name the Black Death, her extremities dying while her heart still beats. The third patient has reached the final stage, bloody foam on his lips, his breathing reduced to shallow gasps. The doctor moves between them with his pointed stick, never touching directly, prodding swellings to check their ripeness. His treatments reflect the peculiar blend of emerging medical knowledge and ancient superstition that characterizes plague medicine. He bleeds one patient into a bowl, believing that removing corrupted blood might halt the infection's spread. Another receives a poultice of crushed emeralds and mercury, ingredients worth fortunes in normal times, but freely applied when death makes wealth meaningless. The third patient, too far gone for active treatment, receives only prayers and a tincture of poppy to ease his passing. You observe from a safe distance as he works, noting his methodical approach despite the futility of his efforts. He speaks to his patients in educated Latin, explaining treatments they can't understand to maintain professional authority. When the third patient finally expires, he marks the time on a wax tablet, adding another entry to whatever grim study he conducts. The other 2 patients watch their companion's death with resigned recognition of their own likely fate. The doctor acknowledges your presence with a nod that makes his beak mask bob grotesquely. He asks if you've seen particular symptoms in your rounds, buboes that burst naturally versus those that remain hard, patients who die quickly versus those who linger. His questions suggest genuine inquiry rather than certain knowledge. Even these specialists, with their elaborate protections and expensive treatments, grope blindly against an enemy they don't truly understand. You patrol across London Bridge, that great stone thoroughfare that spans the Thames like a street suspended over water. The buildings that line both sides of the bridge create a tunnel effect, their upper stories nearly meeting overhead, blocking out most of the night sky. Your lantern light catches the faces carved into doorways, merchants' marks, guild signs, devotional figures, all bearing witness to the catastrophe with unchanging stone expressions. At the bridge's southern gate, the severed heads on pikes present their own grim testimony to justice that preceded pestilence. These traitors' heads, some months old, others freshly placed, show signs of plague even in death, the telltale swellings visible on necks below the severing point, black pustules marring faces already distorted by exposure. Even execution cannot escape the plague's mark, you realize, as if the disease claims dominion over all flesh, regardless of how it died. The bridge's shops stand mostly empty, their proprietors fled or dead. A goldsmith's display window remains intact but abandoned, precious metals and gems glinting in your light, untouched for days. The value system that once would have brought thieves within hours has collapsed entirely. What good is gold when bread becomes precious, when a clean breath of air surpasses any earthly treasure? You notice rats nesting in a fur merchant's stock, expensive ermine and sable reduced to rodent bedding. Through gaps between buildings, you glimpse the Thames below, its dark surface reflecting the few lights still burning in London. Bodies occasionally drift past, victims dumped by those too exhausted or afraid to wait for proper collection. You see one catch against the bridge's great stone piers, held there by the current, a temporary resident of the bridge's underwater foundation until the next strong tide carries it toward the sea. Near the bridge's center stands the chapel of St. Thomas Becket, built into the bridge's structure itself. Someone has barred its doors with planks, though whether to keep plague out or trap it within remains unclear. Through a small window, you see candles still burning inside, their light wavering as if tended by unseen hands. Perhaps a priest maintains lonely vigil, or perhaps the candles simply haven't exhausted their tallow since the chapel was sealed. The bridge holds many such mysteries now, suspended between the dying city's two banks. You investigate an illegal midnight burial in All Hallows churchyard, drawn by the scrape of shovels and muffled voices trying to work quietly in darkness. A family of 5 struggles to enter their patriarch, without church sanction or death certificate, unwilling to consign him to the plague pits beyond the city walls. They'd chosen a corner spot, between 2 ancient yews, where the ground proves softer and their excavation less likely to disturb existing graves, though in truth few spots remain that don't hold some previous resident. The diggers freeze as your lantern light falls upon them, 2 grown sons, their wives, and an adolescent boy who might be a grandson. Sweat and tears mix on their faces, creating clean tracks through the dirt that covers them. The body lies wrapped in what appears to be expensive tapestry, probably pulled from their home's walls, a last gesture of respect in times that permit little dignity. They don't run or offer excuses, simply standing with shovels in hand, waiting for your judgment. You recognize the complexity of their crime. Church law demands proper burial procedures, recording of deaths, examination by church officials. Yet the system has collapsed under sheer volume. The plague pits offer only mass anonymous disposal. Bodies tumble together with quicklime eating away at flesh and bone. These people risk infection and arrest to provide their father what they see as Christian burial, even if it lacks official sanction. The eldest son speaks carefully, explaining their father died of age and exhaustion, not plague, no buboes, no blood, just an old man whose heart gave out watching his city die. They couldn't bear to see him thrown onto a death cart, pitched into a pit with plague victims. He was a member of the Merchant Tailors Guild, the son continues, a respected man who deserved better than lime and anonymity. His voice carries both grief and defiance, challenging you to deny their father this small dignity. You make your decision based on pragmatism rather than compassion. The body shows no plague signs, and forcing them to exhume it would create more risk than allowing completion. You inform them they have until your patrol returns this way, perhaps an hour, to finish their work and disperse. No marker should be placed for at least a fortnight, and they must swear to report any plague symptoms that develop. They nod, grateful agreement, returning to their digging with renewed urgency while you continue into the night. You rest briefly at a public well near Cornhill, one of the few still operating as others have been sealed due to contamination fears. The wooden bucket shows wear from constant use, its rope frayed and knotted where breaks were hastily repaired. You maintain distance from the well's mouth. Some claim the pestilence travels through water, others that corpses have been thrown down wells to poison enemies. The truth remains unknowable, but caution costs nothing in times when every interaction carries mortal risk. Other night workers gather here at careful distances, a link boy whose torch lights the way for those rich enough to break curfew legally, 2 gravediggers whose spades and dirty clothes mark their profession, a nurse heading to tend the sick at St. Bartholomew's. None remove their face coverings to drink, instead pouring water over cloths to moisten mouths through fabric. Conversation happens in brief exchanges, sharing information about which streets to avoid, where new outbreaks have occurred, which physicians still accept patients. The gravediggers speak of running out of consecrated ground, of the bishop blessing new areas daily just to keep pace with demand. They mention strange things found in plague pits, bodies clutching each other who weren't buried together, suggesting some wake after being thrown in, crawling toward human contact in their final moments. One digger swears he heard knocking from inside a sealed coffin, though his partner dismisses this as exhaustion breeding phantoms. The nurse shares remedies she's observed. Some patients recover after their buboes burst naturally, draining the poison, while forced lancing seems to accelerate death. She speaks of children who survive while their parents perish, of elderly who endure while youth succumb, patterns that suggest God's hand moves in incomprehensible ways. Her bag carries herbs and poultices, though she admits most of her work involves providing comfort rather than cure, helping souls transition from this poisoned world to whatever awaits beyond. You all part without farewells. Attachment to other souls has become another luxury London can't afford. Each returns to their grim duty, passing through the night like ghosts serving the needs of a dying city. The well stands as a temporary crossroads for those who maintain essential services, a place to share information and remind themselves that others still fight against the darkness, even if that fight seems increasingly futile. You check wealthy merchants' houses in Lombard Street, where Italian banking families and English wool traders built their fortunes before pestilence made gold meaningless. The grand facades remain impressive, carved stone, painted shutters, glass windows that cost more than common laborers earned in lifetimes. Yet plague respects no social boundaries. Red crosses mark these doors as readily as tenement hovels, and the pleading, "Lord have mercy upon us," carries the same desperation, whether painted on oak or pine. Through one mansion's windows, you observe a scene of abandoned opulence. A long table remains set for a feast that never concluded, silver plates, Venetian glass, candlesticks of worked gold. Food rots on the plates. Wine has evaporated from cups, and flies cloud the air above what was meant to celebrate some now forgotten occasion. A body slumps in the master's chair at the table's head, still wearing rich robes that couldn't protect against invisible death. The servants who might have tended him have fled or died, leaving master and meal to decay together. At another house, You hear weak pounding from within, someone trying to break quarantine from inside. A man's voice, educated and commanding despite its weakness, demands release, claiming he's recovered and the quarantine period has passed. He offers enormous sums for freedom, deeds to properties, shares in trading ventures, a fortune in Italian gold hidden beneath his floorboards. His bargaining continues, even as coughing fits interrupt, each one wet and painful sounding. The red cross on his door bears yesterday's date. He has 39 more days if he survives them. You notice how even wealth's remnants become hazardous. A fine cape dropped in the street might carry infection in its folds. Gold coins passed from dying hands could transmit death to those who claim them. The plague transforms treasure into trap, making paupers potentially safer than those who grab for abandoned riches. Several houses show signs of looting despite the risk. Broken doors, scattered possessions, suggesting some still value wealth over life, or perhaps have reached such desperation that the distinction no longer matters. The street's famous banking houses stand locked and empty, their vaults perhaps still full but inaccessible, their ledgers recording debts that will never be collected, loans that will never be repaid. The entire financial system that made Lombard Street London's economic heart has stopped as surely as a plague victim's breath, leaving only empty architecture as monument to commerce killed by catastrophe. You encounter a procession of monks from Greyfriars Monastery, carrying holy relics through the streets, their chanted prayers echoing off building walls in the pre-dawn darkness. They bear the arm bone of St. Francis in a golden reliquary, held high by their prior, while brothers swing censers that release clouds of frankincense. Their brown robes drag through the filth of London's streets, but their faces show the fervent determination of those who believe their faith might turn aside God's wrath. The procession moves slowly, stopping at each marked door to offer prayers for those sealed within. Some inhabitants respond with weak voices joining the Latin chants, while others remain ominously silent. The monks maintain no protective distance from infected houses, instead pressing close to touch their reliquary against Red Cross doors, believing St. Francis's intercession might save those within. You've seen 3 such brothers collapse during previous processions, their faith unable to protect their flesh. Following the monks comes a ragged crowd of desperate believers, perhaps 30 souls who risk curfew violation and infection for the chance of blessing. They reach toward the reliquary, without quite touching it, as if its holy influence might extend through the air. An old woman crawls on her knees, leaving bloody marks on the cobblestones, convinced that sufficient suffering might earn divine mercy. A young father carries a fevered infant, holding the child up toward the golden box that contains the saint's bone. You should disperse this illegal gathering, enforce the curfew, prevent the spread of infection through close contact. Yet the authority of armed watch seems insignificant against the power of desperate faith. These people have watched physicians fail, remedies prove useless, prayers go unanswered. If processing through plague-struck streets behind ancient bones provides them comfort, who are you to deny that solace? The civic order you're meant to enforce has already collapsed. Perhaps spiritual order, however misguided, serves some purpose. The prior notices you watching and raises the reliquary in your direction, offering blessing to one who serves the city's needs. You nod acknowledgement but maintain your distance, caught between duty and recognition that these monks provide something secular authority cannot, hope in the face of hopelessness, meaning in the midst of meaningless death. The procession continues toward Cheapside, their chants fading into the night, leaving you to wonder whether faith or foolishness drives them through the poisoned streets. You witness a family fleeing the city in violation of quarantine orders, their cart loaded with possessions passing through Bishopsgate in the dead of night. The father walks beside the horse, constantly glancing back as if expecting pursuit. The mother sits in the cart bed, clutching two small children whose faces peek out from heavy blankets. Their household goods pile high: furniture, cooking pots, rolled tapestries, the accumulation of a lifetime being evacuated in darkness. They freeze when your lantern light falls upon them, the father's hand moving to a club at his belt, while the mother pulls the children closer. You see the calculation in their eyes: fight, flight, or negotiation. The man steps forward, speaking quickly about relatives in Canterbury, about leaving before the sickness reached their street, about their right as free citizens to travel the King's roads. His words tumble over each other, mixing truth with obvious fabrication. The children begin crying, sensing their parents' fear. The younger one, perhaps 4 years old, coughs repeatedly, a wet, harsh sound that might indicate plague or might simply be childhood illness. The distinction matters legally but changes nothing practically. If they carry infection, they'll spread it to Canterbury. If they remain in London, they'll likely die whether infected or not. The moral complexity of your duty has never been clearer than in this moment of decision. The father produces a purse, not offering it directly, but making its weight obvious as he shifts it from hand to hand. He speaks of his trade as a silversmith, of the good he could do establishing himself elsewhere, of his children's innocence in matters of law and disease. His wife adds her own pleas, describing the death surrounding their home, the certainty of infection if they remain, the possibility of survival if they flee. Their desperation fills the night air like another kind of infection. You stand silent for a long moment, weighing duty against compassion, law against humanity. The quarantine exists to prevent plague spread, yet London hemorrhages refugees daily through 100 unguarded routes. These people before you represent thousands making the same choice: risk punishment for the chance of survival. Your decision here changes nothing about the plague's inexorable advance, affects only these 4 souls whose lives hang on your interpretation of increasingly meaningless regulations. The children's crying continues, a sound that will haunt whatever choice you make. You investigate strange lights flickering in an abandoned goldsmith's shop on Gutter Lane. The windows glow, suggesting fire, but lacking smoke. Pushing through the broken door, you discover 3 squatters huddled around a makeshift hearth they've created by piling furniture in the center of the ransacked workspace. They're burning the shop's fixtures: carved wooden shelving, account books, even the goldsmith's workbench, anything that will provide warmth against September's creeping cold. The squatters barely react to your presence, too exhausted or resigned to flee. An elderly couple clings together near the flames, their clothes suggesting former respectability now reduced to survival. The third figure, a younger man with the calloused hands of a laborer, feeds another chair leg to the fire. They've already burned through most of the shop's wooden contents, leaving only stone walls and metal tools that won't combust. The smoke escapes through a hole they've knocked in the roof, a crude chimney that at least prevents suffocation. You notice they've attempted to create a livable space amid destruction. Goldsmith's tools have been repurposed. Scales hold water, crucibles serve as cooking pots, delicate hammers crack nuts they've scavenged. They've built sleeping pallets from torn tapestries and goldsmith's felt, creating small comforts in their appropriated shelter. The irony isn't lost. Implements meant to work precious metals now sustain those for whom bread has become more precious than gold. The younger man speaks first, explaining they're not thieves, merely seeking shelter after their lodging house was sealed with them outside and their landlord inside, dying. The elderly couple owned a candle shop, he says, burned down when plague victims' families began burning all possessions to prevent infections spread. They have nowhere else to go, no family to claim them, no guild to provide relief. London has become a city of the displaced, wandering between abandoned buildings, like spirits already half departed from the world. You should evict them, arrest them for theft and destruction of property. Yet the goldsmith is dead. You remember marking his house yourself 3 weeks ago, and his family fled to the countryside. These 3 will likely die regardless, whether from cold, starvation, or plague. Their small fire threatens no neighboring buildings, and their occupation of this space prevents nothing except its eventual collapse from neglect. You warn them about the fire risk, suggest they gather more fuel during daylight to avoid burning the building's actual structure, and continue your rounds. You patrol back through Eastcheap as dawn approaches, the sky lightening to grey above London's rooftops. The street that was merely desperate when your watch began has deteriorated further through the night. New red crosses mark doors that were clear at sunset, the paint still wet and dripping in the morning dew. You count 7 additional plague houses since your first pass, the infection spreading faster than your feet can carry you through your rounds. The bodies you marked for collection earlier remain where they fell, joined now by others. A woman has died sitting in a doorway, her arms still wrapped around a bundle that might be an infant, or simply rags shaped by desperate imagination. 2 men lie together near a tavern's entrance, whether friends who died supporting each other or strangers whose final collapses coincidentally overlapped remains unknowable. The death carts should have passed by now, but perhaps they're overwhelmed elsewhere, or their operators have themselves succumbed. Morning brings no relief, only revelation of night's hidden horrors. Windows that were dark now show faces peering out, some healthy watching for news, others clearly infected waiting for death or miracle. A child's face appears at one window, nose pressed to glass, too young to understand why the world outside has become forbidden territory. You see an elderly man in another window, marking your passage with eyes that have watched too many watchmen pass, too many neighbors disappear. The street's drainage channel runs black with more than normal filth. Someone has been emptying chamber pots from quarantined houses, the waste flowing down the street's center in a reeking stream that will eventually reach the Thames. Rats traverse this flowing sewage fearlessly, some dying mid-crossing, as if the concentration of disease overwhelms even their legendary resilience. You step carefully, knowing your boots carry death from puddle to cobblestone, to wherever your duty next demands your presence. The dawn light reveals messages chalked on walls during the night, prayers, curses, names of the dead, accusations of divine punishment or human wickedness. Someone has written, "God has abandoned London," in large letters across a church wall. Below it, in different hand, "London abandoned God first." These theological debates via graffiti capture the city's spiritual crisis, seeking meaning in meaningless suffering, assigning blame for blameless disease, demanding justice from an apparently unjust universe. You help collect the night's written reports from other watchmen at the ward assembly point near Guildhall, each man depositing his record of observed deaths, new infections, and notable incidents. The clerk who compiles these reports looks fevered himself, sweat beading his forehead despite the morning chill, his hand trembling as he transcribes numbers that grow larger each day. He doesn't complain, knowing that showing weakness might mean quarantine, continuing his vital work of documenting London's systematic destruction. The reports paint a map of catastrophe across the city's wards. Cripplegate, 23 dead, 15 new houses marked. Farringdon, 31 dead, water well contaminated, residents fighting over clean sources. Aldgate, 18 dead, but also 5 recoveries, rare bright spots in otherwise dark accounting. Each watchman adds verbal details the written reports can't capture. The sound of mass grieving from sealed houses, the sight of orphaned children forming feral packs, the smell that now defines entire streets where collection has fallen behind. Old William arrives late, his familiar gait now featuring a pronounced limp. He reports an attack by desperate prisoners who escaped from Newgate when their guards died, roaming the streets like plague-maddened wolves. Another watchman mentions finding an entire congregation dead in a locked church, having gathered for illegal prayer service only to trap themselves with infection. These stories multiply, each adding to the portrait of a city consuming itself through fear, faith, and failing systems. The tally keeper announces provisional numbers, over 300 dead in your district alone since yesterday's dawn. The true number likely exceeds this significantly, as many deaths go unreported, bodies hidden by families avoiding quarantine or simply undiscovered in abandoned buildings. He estimates London loses 1,000 souls daily now, though accurate counting has become impossible as the infrastructure of observation collapses along with everything else. You submit your own report. The elderly woman helped, the flagellants documented, the illegal tavern gathering, the orphan boy still surviving. The clerk records it all with diminishing detail, reducing human experience to hash marks in columns. Your observations join thousands of others in the archives that future historians will study, trying to understand how a great city died, not from invasion or fire, but from invisible enemies carried on breath and blood. The morning bell tolls, ending your watch officially, though in truth the watch never ends now, merely shifts from paid duty to survival's constant vigilance. You observe the first stirrings of dawn activity as the city attempts another day of survival, watching from the steps of St. Michael Cornhill as London wakes to its continuing nightmare. The death carts begin their morning rounds, wheels creaking under loads accumulated through the night. Their collectors call out with less vigor than weeks past, their voices hoarse from repetition and their own exhaustion. Some carts bear makeshift extensions, additional boards nailed to sides, ropes to secure bodies stacked beyond normal capacity. Church bells across the city begin their terrible arithmetic, each toll representing another soul departed. The bells of St. Paul's, St. Mary Le Bow, St. Giles, and dozens of smaller parishes create a cacophony of bronze that makes counting individual deaths impossible. Some churches have stopped tolling entirely, their sextons dead or fled, their priests overwhelmed by the sheer number requiring last rites. The silence from these towers speaks as loudly as the bells that still ring. Shops that still function begin their limited operations. A barber surgeon opens his door, already blood-stained from yesterday's futile treatments, his pole wrapped with fresh bandages that will soon need changing. An apothecary hangs out his sign, though his shelves stand nearly empty, his most potent remedies exhausted weeks ago. These practitioners continue through habit or duty rather than hope, knowing their treatments provide comfort more than cure. The few healthy citizens who venture out move with practiced caution, maintaining wide berths, faces covered, eyes avoiding contact that might invite interaction. They clutch lists of necessities, moving quickly between essential stops. A mother sends her eldest child for bread, watching from her doorway, ready to bar the door if the child shows any sign of fever upon return. The ordinary act of procurement has become a deadly gamble, each venture outside rolling dice weighted toward infection. You watch as London performs its morning ritual of counting costs. New deaths to record, new houses to mark, new orphans to somehow address. The city machinery continues its grinding operation, though with fewer hands to turn the wheels each day. Officials still document, priests still pray, gravediggers still dig, watchmen still watch. This persistence in the face of catastrophe might be humanity's greatest strength or its most pathetic delusion. The distinction matters less each day, as routine provides the only structure preventing complete collapse into chaos. You check one last time on young Thomas, the orphaned boy in the doorway, finding him still alive but noticeably weaker than last night. His eyes barely open at your approach, the apple core still clutched in his small fist, like a talisman against hunger. The sailcloth wrapping has slipped, revealing limbs grown thinner, ribs more prominent. No plague signs yet, but starvation poses its own death sentence, slower but equally certain. You saved bread from the ward office, meant for your morning meal, and place it within his reach, along with information about a merchant's cellar on Silver Street, where flour might still be stored. The boy manages a weak smile, his fingers closing around the bread with painful slowness. He whispers something that might be thanks or might be delirium. The boundary between consciousness and fevered dreams has grown thin for many in London's streets. Making a decision that violates protocol but honors humanity, you mark the wall near his shelter with additional Watchman signs, symbols indicating this space has been inspected and cleared, that anyone disturbing this area faces official consequences. It's a small protection, perhaps meaningless, but it might discourage casual investigation by those who would rob or harm a dying child. You also add a note in your report recommending the parish authorities check this location, though you know such recommendations pile unread as officials struggle with greater crises. The boy watches as you prepare to leave, his eyes holding that peculiar mixture of premature wisdom and childish hope that defines plague orphans. He's learned truths no child should know, that parents die, that safety is illusion, that survival requires choices between bad and worse options. Yet he continues breathing, eating, existing in defiance of circumstances that have claimed stronger souls. His persistence reminds you why you continue your rounds despite the futility, why small acts of kindness matter even as the larger world collapses. Before departing, you tell him about the monastery again, suggesting that if he grows too weak to scavenge, the monks at St. Bartholomew's might provide better shelter than the streets. He nods understanding but makes no commitment. The fierce independence that has kept him alive this long won't easily surrender to institutional charity. You leave him to his breakfast and his choices, knowing this might be your last sight of him. Another small life extinguished or somehow surviving in London's prolonged catastrophe. You return to the ward office as full dawn breaks over London, climbing the familiar stairs with legs that feel heavier than when you descended them 8 hours ago. The weight isn't just physical exhaustion, but the accumulated burden of witness, each death observed, each suffering documented, each small cruelty and kindness adding to the load you carry. Your coat bears stains from the night's work, your boots reek of the shambles, and worse, your equipment needs cleaning and maintenance before tonight's rounds begin the cycle again. The office shows signs of continued operation in your absence. Fresh reports stack on the desk, morning tallies from other wards creating a paper mountain of mortality. A new map hangs on the wall, marked with red dots indicating confirmed plague houses. The dots cluster so thickly in some areas that entire streets appear to bleed. Someone has added black marks for houses where all inhabitants have died, creating a checkerboard pattern of death across London's geography. You strip off your outer garments with practiced care, each piece potentially carrying infection, despite all precautions. The coat goes on its designated hook, far from your sleeping area. Your boots sit by the door where sunlight might purify what vinegar cannot. The ritual of decontamination has become automatic. Wash hands in vinegar water, rinse mouth with wine and herbs, change into sleeping clothes kept separate from patrol wear. These measures might be futile, but ritual provides structure when reason fails. Your small chamber welcomes you with its familiar simplicity: straw pallet, rough blanket, the window overlooking streets that will continue their decay while you rest. The herbs hanging from your rafters have dried to brittleness, their protective power perhaps exhausted, but their presence still offering psychological comfort. You notice new sounds from neighboring buildings: coughing that wasn't there yesterday, a woman's low weeping, the scrape of furniture being rearranged to accommodate sickness or death. The exhaustion pulls at you, demanding rest before tonight's patrol begins the pattern anew. Your body needs sleep, but your mind replays the night's encounters: the elderly woman's gratitude, the orphan's desperate courage, the families torn between law and survival. These images will populate your dreams, mixing with older memories of London before the plague, creating that peculiar nightmare where past normalcy makes present horror more acute. You close your eyes, knowing that when you wake, the bells will still be tolling, the carts will still be rolling, and your duty will call you back to the streets. You climb the stairs to your chamber, exhausted, each step requiring conscious effort as your body protests another night's accumulation of horrors witnessed and duties performed. The wooden steps, worn smooth by generations of watchmen before you, creak their familiar complaint. Your hand finds the rough wall for support, feeling the cold stone that has absorbed September's chill and London's despair in equal measure. The plague may kill bodies, but these nightly rounds slowly consume something deeper: the ability to see suffering without being crushed by its weight. In your chamber, you sit at the small writing desk where the official ledger waits, its pages already half filled with your careful script documenting weeks of escalating catastrophe. By candlelight that wavers with your exhausted breathing, you record the night's observations in the precise language required by city ordinance. 3 bodies discovered, locations marked for collection. 7 new infections observed, houses marked accordingly. 1 illegal gathering dispersed at Boar's Head Tavern. Quarantine violation at Bishopsgate resolved without arrest. The formal words reduce human tragedy to administrative notation, necessary emotional distance for those who must continue functioning. Yet between the official lines, you cannot help but add marginal notes that future readers might wonder at. Elderly woman fed, orphan child still surviving at Thames Street, flagellants increasing in number and fervour. These additions serve no bureaucratic purpose, but feel essential to record small humanities that prove London was more than statistics, even in its dying. Your predecessor's ledger contains similar notations, growing fewer as his final weeks approached, ending with a shaking hand's last entry: "God forgive us all." The candle burns lower as you write, wax pooling and hardening like the city's grief made tangible. Through your window comes the sound of morning prayers from those houses still containing voices to pray. The words drift across the plagued city like smoke, seeking heaven's ear despite all evidence of its deafness. You add your final entry for the night: 8th day of September, year of our Lord 1348. The pestilence continues, the watch continues, London continues, though God alone knows how or why. You close the ledger carefully, knowing that tomorrow night, if you wake, if you rise, if the plague hasn't claimed you in your sleep, you'll open it again to document another circuit through hell's own streets. The thought should bring despair, but exhaustion has moved you beyond such simple emotions into a state of numbed acceptance that might be its own form of plague, infecting the soul rather than the flesh. You prepare for sleep as dawn breaks fully over London. the sun's rays cutting through the perpetual haze of smoke and death that shrouds the city. Churches across the metropolis begin their morning toll, counting the night's dead in bronze voices that merge into a single endless knell. You count automatically. St. Paul's has reached 43, St. Mary Le Bow 37, St. Giles still climbing past 50. These numbers will grow through the day. As more bodies are discovered, more souls release their grip on poisoned flesh. The sounds of daytime London filter through your window, not the robust commercial noise of months past, but the subdued movements of a city under siege by an invisible enemy. Death carts rumble over cobblestones, their wheels needing repair, but wheelwrights dead or fled. Someone shouts about bread prices, the anger in their voice carrying that edge of hysteria that precedes either violence or collapse. A child laughs somewhere, the sound so unexpected it seems almost obscene. A reminder that life persists in pockets despite death's dominion. You think of tonight's patrol already, knowing the streets will have transformed again in the 12 hours of your absence. New crosses will mark doors that were clear this morning. New bodies will await collection. New orphans will huddle in doorways. The baker on Pudding Lane might have succumbed. The elderly woman might have died alone. Young Thomas might have joined the anonymous dead. Or perhaps they all survive another day, adding to the mystery of who lives and who dies in this time, when God's plan seems written in a language none can read. Your body settles into the straw pallet, muscles finally releasing their vigilant tension. The vinegar's sharp scent from your washed hands mingles with the dried herbs above, creating an olfactory barrier against the city's putrefaction. You've done what you could to protect yourself, maintained distance, covered your face, avoided direct contact with the infected. Yet you know these precautions are likely theater, that if the plague wants you, it will find you regardless of vinegar or prayers or careful protocol. The exhaustion pulls you towards sleep, that temporary death that rehearses the permanent one, awaiting all London's residents. In your drowsing mind, the city appears as it was, crowded markets, laughing children, church bells announcing celebrations rather than catastrophes. But even in memory, red crosses appear on familiar doors, and the crowds thin until only you remain, walking empty streets with your lantern raised against a darkness that grows deeper with each passing night. You finally rest, knowing tonight you survived while thousands didn't, your breathing steady as you drift into uneasy sleep. The weight of your duty lifts temporarily, though your dreams will likely replay the night's horrors in fractured narratives where past and present merge. Your body has learned to rest, despite the surrounding catastrophe, a survival mechanism that allows you to continue when continuation seems impossible. The straw beneath you rustles with each breath, a sound that proves you still live, while so many have crossed into silence. Outside, London continues its struggle between death and life, the balance shifting hourly but never quite reaching total collapse. Someone, somewhere, is being born despite the plague, life insisting on its continuance even in death's season. Someone else draws their last breath, adding to the mounting toll that historians will someday calculate with scholarly detachment. Between these extremes, hundreds of thousands cling to existence, neither fully living nor yet dying, suspended in the plague's purgatorial grip. Your watch will resume at tonight's curfew bell, the same route through the same dying streets, but nothing will be exactly as you left it. The city transforms constantly now, each hour bringing subtle shifts in the catastrophe's geography. Houses marked yesterday may stand empty today, their inhabitants fled or fallen. Streets passable this morning might be blocked by abandoned carts or accumulated dead. The London you patrol tonight will be slightly different from the one you just left, changed in ways both obvious and invisible. In your sleep, you might dream of the city recovering, of plague retreating like a tide that has reached its apex. Or perhaps you dream of London empty, its streets given over to nature, grass growing through cobblestones and ravens, the only remaining citizens. Most likely, you dream of nothing at all, your exhausted mind unable to process more horror, even in unconscious symbolism. This blank sleep is its own mercy, a temporary amnesia that makes waking bearable. The cycle continues: sleep, wake, patrol, witness, record, sleep again. You are one small gear in London's vast machinery of survival, turning steadily despite the mechanism's overall breakdown. Tomorrow night, if you wake, you'll oil your lantern, take up your staff, and walk into darkness again. Not from hope or duty or even habit, but from the simple human inability to do otherwise when others depend on your watching. The city needs witnesses to its suffering, recorders of its collapse, someone to carry light through streets where darkness threatens to become permanent. And so you rest, one watchman among many, guarding a city that may already be lost, maintaining order in chaos, standing watch over London's long, terrible night. You've survived the night. As dawn breaks over London's plagued streets, you've witnessed what few could endure. The city at its most vulnerable, its most desperate, its most human. You've walked among the dying and the dead, made choices that will haunt your dreams, and somehow you've returned to tell the tale. But your story is just one thread in the tapestry of a city fighting for survival. While you patrolled the darkness with your lantern held high, others faced their own battles against the pestilence. In our next episode, The Baker's Dawn, you'll experience this same terrible September from an entirely different perspective. You'll wake before sunrise to stoke the ovens that must keep burning, no matter how many of your customers have vanished behind Red Cross doors. You'll knead dough while death carts rumble past your shop, ration flour as supplies dwindle, and face the impossible choice of who gets bread when there isn't enough for everyone who needs it. Because in a city stalked by death, someone still must provide the bread of life. Someone must keep the ovens burning through the darkness, maintaining this most essential service while London collapses around them. Thank you for walking with us through medieval London's longest night. If you'd like to experience more stories from this dark chapter of history, please subscribe and ring the bell, though we promise it won't toll as ominously as those of 1348. Until next time, rest well, and be grateful for the century you wake up in.